Good luck, everyone. Mitzvah Shabbos Kodesh Parshas Vayishlach, and we're learning the Gemara Nedarim. We are up to Daf Mem Vav Amud Aleph. We completed the Mishnah, but just to give you a little introduction to the subject of Breira, because Breira is a subject that involves many different Gemaras. It's primarily in Gemara Beya, Gittin, primarily Gemara Gittin, and then mentioned a number of other places as well. And Sukkah, we had it. Other places, Erevin, we have a lot of Breira, and Baba Kama. And interesting that this Gemara here has a major bearing on the whole subject of Breira, but nowhere does the Gemara actually use the word Breira or the term Breira. It's all in the explanation of the Rishonim based on the Gemara Baba Kama. So in a nutshell, there are two kinds of Breira. One is called a toile bedas acherim, and one is called a toile bedas atzmai. One is, the idea of Breira is, before you get to that, the idea of Breira is that you do something today and you haven't yet worked out exactly how you want it to turn out. You're waiting for an event that will take place later, and you want it to take place retrospectively. And you need retrospectivity, which I'll give you a couple of examples in a minute. So that's the general concept of Breira, but there's two kinds. One is where it's totally up to you personally, and one is where you're dependent on other people. So for example, Toile Bedas Atzmai. Toile Bedas Atzmai is somebody has two wives with exact identical names. He knows he can't live with both of them. He has to divorce one of them. So he writes a get, but he doesn't know which one he'll divorce. And when you write a get, you have to have in mind the woman that you're going to divorce. So he writes a get and he says, whichever one walks out the door first, like by Yiftach, whoever walks out the door first, that's the one that's going to be divorced. Now, at this juncture, I have no idea who it's going to be. But I need to know right now, because otherwise it's not a proper get. In order for a get to be proper, so because of law, it has to be lishma. You have to have the right woman in mind. So I want is that later on, whoever comes out the door first, I wanted retrospectively that the get when was written for her. But this kind of a Breira is Toile Bedas Atzmai. In other words, here there are a number of Amoraim who say that everyone, in this case here, we rule Ein Breira. Why? The whole idea of Breira is that we want to give it some certitude. We want to say that it's definitely happened. What happens later is retrospective. But the fact is, you could have chosen right now. You didn't choose right now, which means right now you don't really know which one you want. So how is it that tomorrow, when she walks out the door, suddenly that means that today you wanted her? You could have wanted her, whichever one you wanted. You're telling us you don't know. Where does retrospectivity come in here? That's why a number of Tanaim hold that there's no Breira in this case. However, what about in the case with Tolub Das Acherim? I put an Erev Tchumen. I want to walk further than the town. I heard a big rabbi is coming to town. I don't know where he's coming, east or the west. There, it's not a question. I want to hear the rabbi. I just don't know where he's coming from. So this is Tolub Das Acherim. And I need retrospectivity because the Tchum has to take place before Shabbos. But I won't know till Shabbos morning. So in this case here, they say that could be Yesh, and in this case over here, it could be Yesh Breira. I definitely am happy. Whatever the thing will be, I want that. I just don't know which one it is. So these are two branches of Breira. Just 1 second, my battery's dying again. Okay, so here we have two kinds of Breira. We also had an example where a person buys a barrel of wine right before Shabbos, and there's no time to give Truma Meiser. So he says the two, loigin that I'm going to separate, but so Shabbos will be the Truma and everything else should be permitted. And again, over here, there's an argument that we say, Yesh Breira, Ein Breira. But here also, it's Toile Bedas Atzmai. It's totally up to me whether I want to. It's totally up to me whether I want which one should be truma, shouldn't be truma. So again, that's called Toile B'das Atzmai. Then we have a discussion. Let's say there is no brera. Let's say there's no brera. So what does that mean? Does that mean that nothing happened? Or that means it happened, but it's not sorted out? So for example, in this very case, I said 2 lugin that I'm going to set aside in Mitzvah Shabbos is going to be truma. So, and we say ein brera. So what does that mean? Does that mean there's no truma in this barrel at all until you set aside and start truma then? Or does it mean that the 2 lugin became truma, but it's not separated? It's mixed in the barrel, and tomorrow night when you'll draw 2 lugin out, who knows if it's the same ones or not? How do we understand yesh brera? Anyway, in halacha we rule that in matters of the Rabbanon we say ein brera, and in matters of questions of the Torah we say, sorry, in matters of laws of the Rabbanon we say yesh brera. So like tchumen, for example, we can put tchumen on both sides, and then if the rabbi comes in one side or another, we'll say that all along it was good, and you can use that tchumen, that erev tchumen, to extend your distance that you can walk out of the city, outskirts of the city. And when it comes to matters of the Torah, we say ein brera. So in the case of the 2 women, you want to divorce the women, ein brera. You cannot use this divorce to divorce any of the women. Machlekes in the Rishonim, what exactly does that mean? According to the Rambam, it means as follows. We don't know. At the end of the day, we don't know what the law is. Yesh brera, ein brera. So we have a general rule. Whenever it's a question of the Torah, we always take the stricter side. And whenever it's a question of the rabbis, we take the lenient side. So the Rabbanan will say yesh brera. Makes things easier. In the Torah, we'll say ein brera. So what happens if, for example, it's only because of a suffix, we don't know which way to go. The other view, the Mashal, Yam Shleima, he says, no, it's a definitive law. The laws of the Torah will say ein brera, and laws of the Rabbanan will say yesh brera. That's the general overview of brera. And that is why our Gemara is going to be very difficult to understand. And when we'll get to the part that's difficult to understand, I'll explain to you. And because of the difficulty of Gemara, some people change everything around that I just told you. But one thing I told you right now is a general overview we glean from everywhere in Shas. That's how we generally learn. So let me give a quick, in our case over here, where does brera even come in? So the first case in our Mishnah was there were 2 partners who shared a courtyard. Because in those days, a courtyard was a 4-yard and everything was done in the courtyard. And they shared a courtyard. And then one person, they both said to each other, you cannot have any benefit from myself. So the Chachamim say, well, you cannot walk into the courtyard because we're following the opinion that says that even just walking, trespassing is also considered a benefit and it's forbidden. And Rabbi Lezer Yaakov says, no, you could walk in the courtyard. In other words, Lezer Yaakov says, so the Gemara Baba Kama says, what's going on here? They're arguing on the principle of brera or ein brera. That Rabbi Lezer Yaakov says, yes, brera, which means when you're walking in the courtyard, in my share, on my portion of the courtyard.
Ben, where is it? We lost it.
And when you're walking in and the other person walking in the courtyard is walking in his portion of the courtyard, because you believe in yesh brera. So that's where brera comes in over here, and that's the first case in our Mishnah. The next case, and then the Mishnah continues, but you cannot put an oven or a mill into the courtyard. And why not? Because even though generally partners, allowed each other to put those things in the courtyard, but technically I can prevent you from doing it. And if I don't prevent you, that in itself is already considered a benefit. And therefore you cannot do that. Okay. Then the next case in the Mishnah is what happens instead of both of them prohibiting each other, only one of them. So you have Reuven and Shimon said to Reuven, I want you to have any benefit from me. So the same argument. So can Reuven walk into the courtyard? He's a partner. According to the rabbis, no, because he's trespassing on the other person's share as well, ein brera. And according to Rabbi Yaakov, yes, he can. In fact, why does the Mishnah have to even repeat this case? The principle is the same, because it's the next line of the Mishnah. The next line of the Mishnah is, but we forced the person who made the vow. The person said, I will not have any benefit from you, let's say. I will not have any benefit from you, so he cannot walk into this courtyard. He has to sell his share. Why does he have to sell he has to break up, dissolve the partnership and sell out. Why does he have to sell out? because he put himself in a situation where he might become envious. The partner can walk around the courtyard, do whatever he wants, and he can't. So he might either forget or he'll be envious and he'll do it anyway. So he'll breach his own vow. You put yourself in a very invidious position. And therefore we say that you have to dissolve the partnership and sell out. And that's how that's what the Mishnah means when we say that he has to sell out. But when it comes now, what's the problem? Rabbi Levan Yaakov says you're allowed to walk in the courtyard regardless. So what's the problem? The problem is the oven and the stove. And even though technically, if I'm jealous, I can stop the partner from putting in the oven and the stove, but I'll be too embarrassed. All partners allow that. How can everyone will become public knowledge that I don't allow him? So I'm embarrassed, and therefore it can lead me to come to do a sin. That is the view of the Ran and most Rishonim. However, and the Ran clearly says, but if I said to the person, if I said to my partner, you cannot have any benefit from me, then the partner who cannot, put an oven and all that in, but the partner cannot, what do you call it? Does not have to sell out his position. Why not? The partner might end up doing a sin. He might be jealous of me putting in an oven. It's because otherwise, every time two partners are together and I want to force you to get out of the partnership, I'll just put a neder on you and say you cannot have anything to do with me, and therefore you're going to have to sell. That's not fair. The Rambam learns exactly the opposite. And the Rambam learns as follows, based on an interesting, this fundamental discussion. What happens if there were two people, let's say Reuben and Shimon, and Reuben says to Shimon, I ban you from having any benefit from me. And then Shimon goes ahead and does benefit from Reuben. Who committed the sin? Reuben, the one who made the vow, or Shimon, the one who's on the receiving end of the vow? Shimon was told you don't have any benefit from Reuben, but Reuben is the one who made the vow. So everyone learns practically that Reuben didn't do a sin. He didn't do anything wrong. He didn't walk into the house. He was allowed to. It's Shimon. Shimon was told he's not permitted. He's forbidden to walk into Reuben's house. There's a neder out there, and he walked in. So Shimon is guilty, and he will get 39 lashes. The Rambam disagrees. He says that Reuben is the one who committed a sin because the Torah says, "Lo yachel devarei," don't breach your words. Who's the one who made the words? Who's the one who said the words? It was Reuben. So therefore, Reuben is guilty, even though Shimon was the one who walked into the house. But Shimon didn't make any promises. He never said anything. What's up to do with him? It's Reuben who's guilty. So therefore, the Rambam learns in our Gemara, the case would be exactly the opposite. That if Reuben said to Shimon that you cannot have any benefit from me, then if Reuben said to Shimon, you cannot have a benefit from me, that's when Reuben has to sell out, because Reuben is the one who will be committing a sin here. Not Shimon, Reuben, the one who made the promise. And that was the next case in the Mishnah. The next case in the Mishnah was if, let's say, a third party could walk into the property. For example, if one of the partners said to the third party, you have no right to walk in. Same principle. According to the rabbis, yes, because he can, according to the rabbis, he cannot walk in because Ein Breira, he'll be walking in, he'll be trespassing on one of the partners that forbade him to walk in. And Rabbi Yaakov says you could walk in because he can say, I'm walking into the other party's share of the property, not yours. The Rajma says that only works if he's actually going into the property to deal with and associate with the other partner. But otherwise, he can't walk into the property. Then the next case we had was, what happens if Reuben and Shimon got into a fight, and Reuben said to Shimon, I don't want you to have any benefit from me. Reuben happens to be a landlord, owns a number of properties in town, and they're all leased out, and one of them happens to be the public bathhouse. Can Shimon use that public bathhouse? There's a leasee there. There's somebody else in charge. But Reuben ultimately is the landlord. Is it considered Reuben's house, and therefore this Shimon cannot walk into it or not? So the Mishnah says it depends. If Reuben still has some ties to that house, it's called Tfisas Yad, then Shimon cannot walk in there. But if he has no ties to the house, then Shimon can. What is the definition of ties? We'll see in the Gemara in a minute. And then the last case we had was if a person said to his friend, your house is forbidden to me. Then the law is, as long as that person is alive or the owner of the house, you cannot walk in. But the moment that person sells it to a third party or dies, you could walk in, because I stressed your house. But if I said, this house is forbidden to me, then regardless of who the owner is, you can sell it to anybody you want, I cannot walk into the house. In other words, this house is far stricter than your house. On the other hand, your house is stricter. Because what happens if the house, let's say the house is demolished and you build a brand new house? Can I walk into that house? If I said your house, it's still your house, so I cannot walk in. But if I said this house, well, this is no longer the original house, so I could walk in. So it works both ways. So now we're up to the Gemara here. Says the Gemara. We have a question. How do we understand the Mishnah? The Gemara is saying now that we can understand the Mishnah two ways. One way is when the rabbi said that you have two partners and one of them, and they banned each other from walking in. The reason why they banned each other, so the reason why the rabbi said you're not allowed to walk into the property is maybe really yesh breira. Really, each person really owns 100% or 50% of 100%. In other words, when you're walking in the property, you can say, you're walking in on that other person's share. I'm working on my own share. There's no problem. But we penalize you. We don't like this situation where you make Nedarim, and therefore we penalize you for banning yourself on the other person's property. We don't want you to walk in there at all. It's a penalty. And is that the reason why? So what happens if one of the people say to the other person, you cannot walk into my property, on my side of the property? Since it's not fair to make a penalty in this case, because I guess the one on the receiving end of the vow didn't do anything wrong. Why should it be penalized? Then maybe the rabbis will say he could walk around the property because he owns a share of it. So when he's walking, he say, "I'm walking on my share of the property." Or that's unrelated to penalties. It's purely a question of breira, and the rabbis do not believe in breira, and therefore every single inch of that property is owned by both of you, and therefore you cannot walk there. Says the Gemara. Ibailu. The question is, Benidrai pligi. What they're arguing in a case where I made the neder, I made the vow. What about hidiru zezemai? What about that each one said the other one is forbidden? Mi amrim, do we say benidrahu the pligi that but only by nidra when I imposed upon myself a ban. I said I won't have anything to do with you. That's when we argue because we should penalize you because it's not the normal behavior. But if they banned each other, so it's Meidel or Rabban was Yaakov, perhaps they concede to Lezim and Yaakov that either party can walk in. The Chianus and Dummy, they're considered, it's not their fault. They found themselves in a situation. You put me in this, you forbade me to walk onto your share of the property. So why in the world would you penalize that person? So therefore, he could walk and say, "This is my share." They're arguing in all cases, Rabban, because we don't believe in breira. We don't believe that it's so that we don't know who belongs to what and what belongs to who, and therefore it is forbidden. Tashma coming here. The Gemara is going to attempt to prove it from our Mishnah. At the end, the Gemara is going to remain with a question we haven't resolved. Tashma coming here. It says in the Mishnah, if one of them is forbidden hana from his friend, he cannot have any benefit from his friend, and it sounds like you put a ban on me from walking into the property, and yet upligi Rabban said I'm not allowed to walk in the property. So it's clearly from here, why can't I walk on the property? No penalties there, I didn't do anything wrong. It's purely because of ein breira. There's no sorting out, we don't know who owns what, and therefore I cannot step foot on that property. Says Gemara, your proof is not valid. And why not? All mudr means is that I am forbidden to walk on your property. But who imposed that prohibition on me? You can learn two ways. Either I brought it upon myself, I made this vow, or you made this vow towards me. It's not proven either way. So therefore, perhaps the Mishnah is talking about a case where I brought it upon myself, even though the Mishnah uses the word mudr, which means that I am the one that is forbidden to go. But how do we know who placed that prohibition? Tani nodar mechaverai. Say, read it as if I made a neder. I will not have anything to do with my friend Hana, any benefit. And I'll prove it to you. The Tani Sefer, it says in the Sefer, we forced the person who made the neder limkas chalka to sell his share. Now, if you say I brought it upon myself, makes sense. Why we impose this penalty? You have to sell your share, or repeal your neder. That's why it says kaifin. That's what it says kaifin. We force you. If you learn that the other person put a neder on me that I shouldn't benefit, am I kaifin? I say, why in the world would you force me to sell my property because he put a neder? Hamen is honest. It's not my fault. You can't force me to sell my property because my partner put a neder on me. It's his problem, not my problem. So the Gemara doesn't resolve it, which means from our Gemara, we don't know, Bereira or Ein Bereira. We don't know which way it is. So we'll come back to that later. Now we have an interesting argument. In the Mishnah in Bava Basra Daf Yud Aleph, there's a whole discussion. Partners, can I force my partner to dissolve the partnership? We're no longer friends. I want to dissolve the partnership. How does it work? Are we partners for life? So the Mishnah there gives us a number of different examples where you can force a situation of the solution of a partnership, provided that the remainders of this asset is sufficient for both parties. So, for example, on a property, in a house, in a courtyard, you want to divide the courtyard, not dividing the house, you're dividing the courtyard. And the courtyard, there has to be a minimum of space in order to allow them to place things there. They should bring the donkey in. So every doorway needs 4 amas. Actually, I take it back. The doorway needs 4 amas extended into the property, 4 amas width. They used to park their donkey, their mules over there. They need space. So you need, first of all, each house to have a door with 4 amas. Whether every door of the house gets it or not, we'll learn about an argument of Gunnar. But at least one door needs to have a space of 4 amas depth into the chutzner and the width of 4 amas. Then within the chutzner itself, each one needs a space of another 4 square amas, because they will put their oven there, they will place things there. They need space. So you need to have a minimum of 16 amas square in a chutzner before I can force you to dissolve this partnership. But if, let's say, it's less than that, then neither of them have sufficient space there to use a chutzner and make maximum use of it, to use it properly. So therefore, then the thing is, you cannot force each other to sell. What you could do is use the famous principle of good or agud. Good means either you sell, you buy me out, or agud, I will buy you out. And we're going to learn that in more of a Basar Yugimel. That's how we dissolve a partnership. So the question is, the argument in our Gemara here, whether you say Breira or not Breira, is it applying in a case where the chutzner is large enough that we can force each other to divide the property? But the fact is, we haven't divided the property yet, so we say, yes, Breira, it's as if we divided already, or ain't Breira or not. Or are we talking about a chutzner that ain't badin chalukah, a chutzner that's too small to divide, and we say the yesh breira that every step of the way while I'm there is mine, or ain't breira, we're both mixed the whole time, as we'll explain in a minute. So first, we have an argument between Rabba and Rabbi Yosef, and they're both arguing what Zeiri said. Amar Rabba, Amar Zeiri. Rabba said in the name of Zeiri. Machlek is, the whole argument is kishiyesh bo kedei chalukah. They're only arguing in a case where the courtyard is large enough that we could divide it. Aval ein badei chalukah. If it's not large enough to divide, then everyone agrees that it's permitted. And what's going on? What's the difference? It goes as follows. The whole idea of Breira is that we don't know right now what's going to be, and we're going to sort it out later and make it retrospective. So but in the case of a chutzner, she'ein badin chalukah. So what was our arrangement from the beginning? It's too small. What was our arrangement? Our arrangement, the way the Ran explains it, as follows. Each one of us owns not half, but the entire property, because it's indivisible. The only thing that we're dividing is the time. When I use it, there's no space for you. When you use it, there's no space for me. But each one of us at the moment owns the entire property. So therefore, when it comes to a chutzner and chalukah, everything is sorted out basically. But what? We just don't know the time schedule. So the breira that we need over here is minimal. The retrospectivity involved is very minimal, because the ownership has all been settled and sorted out. It's only a question of time. While I'm using it, it's totally mine. When you're using it, it's totally yours. So in this case, everybody agrees yes, breira. So therefore, if we make a ban on each other, each one of us can walk on it while we're there. It's totally ours. They're arguing in a case where the chutzner can be divided. In the case where the chutzner can be divided, they could have divided the first day from the very beginning. We just didn't. Therefore, in this case over here, because we could have divided, we didn't. So what do we actually have in the property now? What we have is as follows. I have a right to the entire property, but I don't own the entire property, because the property is divisible. I only own 50%. But what do I have? I have a right to 100% of the property, because we're partners and we didn't divide it yet. So there's no imaginary line here. I can use the whole property and you can use the whole property. So we both have rights to the whole property, but we both have ownership only of 50% of the property. Versus when it's ein badin chalukah, you cannot divide it. So each one of us has 100% ownership of the property while it's in my use. So in a chutzner sheyesh badin chalukah, because I only own 50% of the property, but I have rights to the whole property. If you place a neder and you say that my property, my property is or I placed on I said, I don't have anything to do with your property. To me, your property is like hektish. To me, your property is like a carbon. So then 50% of the property, right, which is yours, is forbidden to me. And even though I have 100% of the right of the property, my hektish overrides my rights. Hektish cannot override ownership, because I had previous ownership, but can override my rights. So now it belongs to hektish. So therefore, that's the argument. The argument is if you say brera, but when is that? Only if you say ein brera. But if you believe in yesh brera, which means that whatever that yesh brera is, that whatever I'm walking on, that's totally mine. It's now my property, and therefore the hektish cannot overturn ownership. So they're only arguing in the case where the property is large enough to be divisible, or the property is indivisible, then each one has full ownership, and it's only a question of time. Everybody agrees. In this case, we'll say yes, brera, because it's not really much. It's definitely mine while I use it. It's definitely yours while you use it. So when I walk on it, it's mine. And the brera is only the times, but that, that's sort of made up already. So very minimal use of brera. That's Rabba's view. Amar Rabbi Yosef said, we're going to learn in the next Mishnah. If two people made these Nedarim, got into a big fight, we're going to learn that there's certain things that belong to the entire world. Things that belong to the entire world, it's like hefker, nobody has any rights to it. But things that are communal property, for example, a shul, every person in that shul, every member pays money, contributes money. Everyone is an owner of that shul. So what happens in a shul? If you walk in, according to the rabbis, you hold ein brera, and I say, I don't want you to have any benefit from anything that belongs to me. Well, I have a share in the shul. You can no longer walk in the shul. How do we know that their seat is not really what belongs to me? Ein brera, we haven't sorted out ownership, who owns what. You can no longer walk in the shul. If you hold yesh brera, then you could walk into the shul. Now, a shul is indivisible. I can't force people to buy me out or take you over to sell the shul. It's indivisible. You cannot divide the shul amongst the people of the community. And therefore, it's according to you, you said that everybody agrees the shul is indivisible. We'll say yesh brera. So why can't people walk into the shul even though we banned each other? I'm sitting in my section. I'm walking in my area. So doesn't that prove that even though it's indivisible, if the same argument of brera still applies? Says Rabbi Yosef. The kamisha it's tantamount to a yard that's indivisible, and yet we learned in the Mishnah Shneim Asher, and they're both forbidden. They're both forbidden something that belongs to the community, and if we banned each other from having any pleasure from myself, then you cannot walk into a bathhouse, you cannot walk into a shul, let's say a public bathhouse, because everyone has a share in it and everyone has ownership, and you're having benefit from the other person's ownership. Hello, Rabbi Yosef. Amaziri. Says Rabbi Yosef, name Aziri. Exactly the opposite. You know what the argument is? When there's no chalukah. If the courtyard is large enough to be divided, then you have to apply the rules of brera, and everyone agrees that ein brera. Everyone agrees ein brera. What are they arguing in? They're arguing in an indivisible courtyard, and the rabbis still maintain that ein brera. So obviously you cannot walk into the courtyard because you're walking also on that person's share of the property. But Rabbi Elazar Yaakov says in this case the brera is less of a brera because most of the negotiations sorted out already that each one of us owns the entire property during our use. It's only a question of which times is for me, which times are for you, and therefore that kind of brera perhaps is allowed. That we say in this case yesh brera. Now this caused a lot of problems because the Gemara concludes it clearly that we say yesh brera, at least to a certain extent. The problem is that we just said before that the halacha is when it comes to matters of the Torah, we say ein brera. In the case of the two women walking, he wrote a get for both for one of the wives, both have the same names. We say that it's not a valid get. He shouldn't be using that get because ein brera. So how can our Gemara rule like Rabbi Elazar and Yaakov that yesh brera in the law of the Torah? So this put a spanner in the whole subject of brera or not. So Rabbeinu Tam comes along and says, as a result of that, since the halach is we say ein brera by the Torah, I'm going to change the whole pshat in the Gemara, and this Gemara has, we conclude that the reason why the halacha is Abelazar ben Yaakov, and not for the reason that he says, nothing to do with Breira. You know why the halacha is Abelazar ben Yaakov? Because we believe that trespassing on a property is not called hana. We call it vitur. Vitur means people generally forego it. And what's the big deal? Somebody walks on your property. And if I walk on your property, what benefit do I really have? It's not tangible, it's minimal, it's nothing. And that's why it's permitted. Nothing to do with Breira, because Breira, the rule is ain Breira. So how can we rule here that two partners can walk on the property? Which means, according to this, if I clearly specified that you should not walk on the property, then you wouldn't be able to. The as a result of this question, learns exactly the opposite. He concludes, must be that therefore forget everything else we talked about, and the final ruling of the Gemara is yesh breira, because of the Gemara right here, that mahatayra yesh breira, not like we said before. And then you have the Ran, who said that this kind of breira, because it's so minimal, will say yesh breira, but everywhere else will say ein breira. Okay, next Gemara. So we said that if I ban someone from having any benefit from me, and I happen to be a landlord, so it depends if I still have connections to that property or not. So how do we understand that? So we said if the landlord has some tfisas yad, has some connection, then that's forbidden. What's going on here? You know what tfisas yad is? It's like you have these shopping centers now that not only they charge you rent, but they also get a share in the revenue. Get 1-2%, whatever your turnover is. So Rav Nachman says, if the landlord has a share in the profits, gets a share in the revenue or the profits, if he gets half or even a third or even a quarter, it's substantial enough that we say the landlord still has ownership of the property, and therefore that person cannot walk onto the site. Anything less than that, no. Anything less than a quarter is not substantial. Abaye says, Abaye says even less than that, even 1%. If this landlord gets any share of the profits or of the revenue, then the landlord is a partner, and it doesn't. You don't get diluted when it comes to money matters. It doesn't. You don't say that it gets diluted, and it doesn't get diluted, and therefore you're not allowed to walk into the house. Not everyone agrees with what I just said, that the word botzer means less than a quarter. Some say botzer means eggs. In fact, the Ran says botzer is supposed to be beya, eggs. And what does that mean? It means as follows. If this landlord is permitted to station a kiosk in the middle of this bathhouse and sell dozens of eggs there, then he has still a connection to that bathhouse. There's some mikvahs around in New York. After you go to the mikvah, they sell you cholent and kishke and kugel there. They have a little kiosk right in the mikvah. That's what so the Ran says, if they had a kiosk right there in the bathhouse to sell food, and the landlord is still involved, you, the person that has been forbidden to have any benefit from the landlord, cannot walk in there. The other opinion is, they read it bitzes. Bitzes means that you can walk in there, and they used to take dirt and water and make clay, pottery. If he had a little kiosk there, a little room there where he can make pottery in that bathhouse, that means he still has a connection. So any connection at all means that the landlord still has a hand in that property, and you cannot then enter that property. However, so the Mishnah says that if there's no tfisas yad, you can. What does that mean? The mekabel betaska. That what do you mekabel betaska? So there's one way of looking. Taska means as follows. What happens? Some say taska means literally a fixed rent. If he pays a fixed rent, there's no revenue, share revenue, there's nothing else. Just pays a normal rent. That's called taska. And then the landlord doesn't really have any ownership, because the tenant is in charge of this property, totally in charge of the property, and therefore another person can walk into this property. The problem with this Gemara is, and all the Rishayim deal with it, there's another Gemara that clearly says if the landlord decides to take the tenant's house, which he owns, and consecrate it and makes it kodesh, the tenant can no longer step into there. He's stealing from hekdesh. So there we say clearly the landlord has the right to make it hekdesh. And here we say that if he's no tfisas yad, all he do is getting rent, the landlord is no longer connected to this property. Now remember, when you ban somebody, you make a neder and you say it's forbidden for you to have pleasure, you're using the word koinim. Koinim means that should be like a carbon, hekdesh. And what's going on here? So how come you're saying here that if he's not involved in the share in the revenue, he cannot ban this house from another person? So that caused a lot of issues. So there's a number of answers. One answer is the difference between our Gemara and this Gemara is as follows. Our Gemara is talking about where the tenant prepaid the entire rent. So because the tenant prepaid the entire rent, then the landlord no longer has a connection to this property. But the Gemara over there is talking about where the tenant is paying on a monthly basis or pays all the way at the end. So the landlord is still involved in the property, and that's why you can make it hektish. That's one view. Another view is there's a difference. Over there is talking about, he told the tenant, I'm renting you a house. So I can make this house hektish because I'll give you another house to live in. Our Gemara is talking about when he said, I'm renting you this house. And because he said, I'm renting you this house, if the landlord is not getting a share in the revenue, he's no longer involved. The Ran says that when we say task over here, it's not rent, the normal rent, because then a landlord still has a hand in the house and the landlord can make a kodesh. It's talking about like these 99-year leases, in Canberra or whatever, in Hawaii, where there's a lease, a fixed price, but the landlord can't throw you out of the house. It's not like a normal landlord and tenant relationship. And therefore, because it's not like a normal landlord and tenant relationship, it's even though he's getting some income from it, it's a tenant's house completely. Even though I was reading that in Israel right now, there's major problems because the church owns big parts of Rehavia, and it's coming up their lease, and everybody's worried what's going to happen soon. You can throw them, technically, when the lease is up, they can throw them out and take the houses away. So, so that's what it means here. The landlord is no longer involved. That's when the tenant can walk in there. If the landlord is still involved, then the tenant cannot walk in. This is also the basis if you're staying in a hotel on Shabbos. And if you want to make the carry within the parameters of the hotel itself, there's proper walls, but there's no area or no chatzeris. So they say that because the landlord has tfisas yad, and the tfisas yad here and there is because the furniture belongs to the landlord. He can take the fridge out of the room if he wants to. He can take the TV out. He can do whatever he wants. Therefore, the landlord has a tfisas yad in all the rooms. So it's one owner and one landlord, and therefore you don't need an area. Sorry, what were we saying?
Yeah. It may have been I just lost it. I lost the last minute. It may have been just my internet connection.
No, we're just talking about a hotel on Shabbos that you can carry in the parameters of the hotel. If the owner is one owner, not certain rooms belong to other people, but it's one owner, and the owner has tfisas yad, has a hand in every room because they have their own furniture. They can take it out, and they can force you to shift rooms. So therefore, they have control, and that's why it's considered one owner, and you don't need an erev chatzeres. Okay.